Hi, my name's James, and I'm making this short video to answer one of the main questions I get asked about eating disorders. Now, I'm somebody with lived experience of eating disorders, and a lot of my work is in policy and advocating people with eating problems, their families and their carers as well. And one of the main questions I get asked is, how can I support a loved one or a friend with their eating disorder? And there are many parts to answering this question, really. But one of the main things I want to say to start with is that it's absolutely valid to be worried about somebody with an eating problem. Eating disorders take a number of different forms, and they're very individually different and affect people in different ways. But I think that sometimes it can get to a very difficult and dangerous situation, and it's very natural to be very worried about somebody and think, how can I help? Sometimes it gets to a point where you think that you can't help, or you're treading on eggshells, and that can be a really difficult situation to deal with. Interpersonal conflicts can arise where it feels like a battle of wills. You're trying to help somebody, they don't really seem to want the help, you don't really know what that's all about. How can't they see what they're doing is hurting themselves? All these kind of things can rise up and actually get in the way of any meaningful kind of connection which could help somebody. So I think that that first point of, your feelings about somebody, your concern for somebody is absolutely valid, and to want to do something to help is absolutely valid too. But then it comes to the point of, well, what can you actually do that's helpful, because some things don't seem to work, some things seem to miss the mark. Now, one of those things that you could do is educate yourself about eating problems. You could go onto the internet. There are a number of different useful videos and websites. Beat Eating Disorders is the UK's main eating disorder charity, which has excellent resources on their website, and I've linked that underneath this video. I think that that's a really good step, into sort of familiarising yourself with the kinds of problems somebody might be experiencing, but it might not actually apply to the person who you care about and the person you want to support. And a good example of that is that if you go online and you look for information about eating disorders, you'll probably learn about anorexia first. Anorexia nervosa affects about 10% of people with eating disorders, but you wouldn't necessarily think that based on the reflections of eating disorders in the media or the information that you're most likely to find out there. And the vast majority of people with eating disorders are not at all underweight. So some of these assumptions that we might have might be reinforced by looking in certain areas for information, and actually what's most important is what that person you care about is really going through in their life. And so whilst you might find out some information about the kinds of things eating disorders might be, the most important thing is probably listening to that person that you care about, and actually not letting preconceived ideas about what eating disorders are, or the fact that you read something in a book, stop you from listening to actually what they're really going through for themselves. So how can we be better listeners? I think that's a much more interesting question than how much do we need to know about eating disorders in the first place, because they're all so different. They're all such individually different experiences, and yes, we have names for clusters of symptoms, but how something plays out in somebody's life might be really different from how it plays out in somebody else's life. Now, when it comes to eating problems, I think that whilst there's a validation for your concern about somebody having eating problems, I think we also have to really understand that people have eating problems for very, very good reasons. Not often straightforward reasons, but they really do have them for very good reasons. And for me, I know in my own experience that having an eating disorder was one way of feeling safe in a world that I found very threatening. People often say eating disorders are about control, and maybe control is a part of it, but for me, the control was all actually about feeling safe. So I didn't necessarily need to be in control of the food, I needed to be in control in order to feel safe. And so if an eating disorder is somebody's way of coping perhaps with the world, or a survival mechanism in some instances, taking it away from them, even if you're really concerned and you want them to stop or you want them to change, that might be fundamentally very threatening for them. So whilst your anxiety is really real, for them, their anxiety is probably really real as well. And being able to meet through all of that stuff, really, really difficult, but it has to be based on listening. And if you listen to somebody and jump in straight away and say, oh, well, you need help with this, or I can fix this, or have you thought about X, Y, and Z, that might not be the kind of listening that they want, because it might feel very threatening, or as though you want to act and you want to take away, and that person might feel really disarmed by that or really threatened by that, and that's where things can escalate. Instead, I think it's really important to be able to listen to somebody and sit with what they're saying without having to rush in and intervene. You're not an eating disorder specialist, most likely, and perhaps that isn't actually what somebody needs from you as a friend. They might not actually need help. Sure, it's nice to offer help, and I'll talk about that a bit more, but it's actually really important to be listened to and heard first before any idea of thinking, how can I change and how can I get help? I think the connecting in the difficulty of it, that could be translated literally as compassion. Yeah, to meet somebody in their suffering and not want to paper over it or not want to run away from it. I think that that is one of the greatest things that we can do for each other. And active listening does involve showing the person that it's okay for them to talk. It's not the same as saying, you can talk to me anytime you like, message me whenever, because that person might feel so ashamed or embarrassed about talking about their eating disorder that they might need quite a lot of encouragement that you really mean that, and that you actually will be okay listening to some of the things that they might be feeling really personally ashamed of. So actually active listening might be about encouraging somebody by showing that you're really interested, by showing that you're not phased or judging them about what they're saying, and maybe setting a few little stepping stones that they can then feel more and more comfortable to open up slowly to you, and that you're not going to suddenly run away or find what they're saying really distasteful, and that you're not going to try and rush in and intervene, but that you can sit with it with them. And that is very, very affirming and helps people, and certainly helped me in my experience with my good friends, to feel like what you're going through is valid and real, and yes, is difficult. And I think that that is a great gift to be able to give to somebody. So active listening, active offers of support as well. I think that it's great to say to somebody, ask me for anything that you like anytime and I'll do it. But whether they will actually do that is another matter. They might feel really ambivalent about it. They might not be used to taking up space. They might have shrunk their body so small because they just don't want to take up space, in some instances with eating disorders. And I think that active offers of help that make it easy for the person to accept. Sometimes it's just about reassurance. You'd be saying, could I go to that appointment with you? That could be a really nice thing to be offered, even if you don't feel like you could take it up, but maybe you really want to take it up, but you're thinking the person's just being polite, offering to go to the appointment with you. And so as a friend, you can say, I really, really would like to go to the appointment with you. I think it's really important that you don't have to go on your own if you don't want to, and I'm really happy to do that. Like just a repetition or a reassurance that can help somebody to accept help when that might be something they're not very used to, or they might feel like a burden, which often comes in when you experience chronic health problems anyway, whatever their kind. So active listening, active support, and offering of help, which doesn't put the burden on the person who might actually be really struggling in the first place. Not having to be an expert in eating disorders is really important. I think that it's also important to remember that there is more to the person you care about than their eating problem. Yes, in emergency situations where somebody's health is really at risk, or even their life is at risk, you have to act and you have to address the problem. Not being afraid to take it head on when it really needs to be taken on. But I also think that it's so important as friends to be able to talk about other things that aren't to do with eating, to still invite people to join in with things, even if you think they might struggle with it, and say, again, that active support of help. We're organising dinner with friends, and I know that might be difficult for you. Is there anything I can do to help? Is there anything you might be able to join in with, but might not be able to join with other things? We don't have to say it's all or nothing. And still inviting people, even if they can't make it, and still feeling like that you're able to include people, and not assuming that they won't be able to do things. Even if you know that they can't, sometimes it's just really nice to be asked and not to feel like you've been forgotten about or written off because you struggle with a certain element, which happens to be really important to socialising, which is food, eating and drinking and things like that. Doing things that aren't to do with food is really refreshing sometimes. I think living with a chronic eating disorder, as I have, and certain times it's become very, very severe and very dominating, and life shuts down and options shut down, and this is the only thing that's going on in your life. And sure, it might be keeping you safe, but it's actually very dangerous and malfunctional in some ways as well. It's so nice to be reminded sometimes that there are other things about you than your eating disorder, and being seen by clinicians and professionals all the time as, this person has an eating disorder, well, this person also cares about this person also enjoys this, and engaging your friend or your loved one in those other things that perhaps they've forgotten, or there's things that they used to love, or just talking about things that aren't just about food, even if that is a really immediate concerning problem. I think that it can show that person that there is more to them and there is more to life than their eating disorder. And I think of my good friends who've really always remembered that I am not just this problem, and they've seen beyond that problem. And whilst they recognise that, you know, it's a very real thing for me, and it has been a survival mechanism for me, and it helps me to meet my needs in some ways that I really struggle to meet in other ways, because eating disorders are very effective, which is why people have them. But I think that those friends that have really reminded me, you know, there's more to you than that, and I can see that, and I can show you that I see that. That has been a lifeline to me and really helped me to keep a sense of hope and to keep a sense of being able to keep going, and that things will get better when they're difficult, and that I can really appreciate other things in life, sometimes even more because some things have been really a struggle, so I really notice the good things as well. I think those moments with friends and those friends that have, you know, engaged that part of me as well have been a real lifeline, and it's been really, really valuable to be reminded of that. So I think some of these things hopefully are helpful. You don't have to be an expert, you don't have to have specialist knowledge, you have to be really at heart a compassionate, listening, caring person, and yes, also caring about yourself and that you're very worried, and validating that, but trying not to let things escalate into a tension or a war of wills, because eating disorders are really, really strong sometimes and can be very, very willful, and so I wouldn't want to get in a fight with an eating disorder. But really it's about trying to reach each other and trying to show somebody that they are cared about, and that they are seen as more than their eating problem, that they are worth being included, that they are worth being reached out to, and that it doesn't always have to be an effort for them to try and get help. I think those things are all really, really important and hopefully helpful. And yes, of course, if you're really urgently worried about somebody, then medical intervention is often needed, but being with somebody and being alongside somebody can be really valuable during that as well. So thank you for watching this video. I think just tuning in to watch this video shows that you're interested and you're concerned and that you're perhaps worried about somebody, and that's really, really valid too. And hopefully you feel more empowered that you can talk about things, that you don't have to get everything right all of the time, and it doesn't have to be about the specific details and having special eating disorders knowledge. It's about being able to be a really good friend, and that's something we can all do in sickness and in health, and whatever that health condition might be, whether it's an eating disorder or not. So thank you for listening. Do check out any of the resources that I've posted underneath, or feel free to get in touch and ask other questions or specific questions, and keep looking after yourself, because that helps you to look after other people as well. Thank you.